Hello, everyone. And I just need to apologize. I am so sorry that this has taken me so long. Everybody else has gotten their videos up regarding the new mix of Revolver, and I'm lagging behind here. One of the things was I was under the weather. I did have a cold. It wasn't COVID, thank God. But I did have a cold, and I had the sniffles and the tired stuff, so I just didn't have the energy. But I now have the energy, and also I really needed to listen to this one because I'm going to be frank. This one didn't knock me out the way the 2017 mix of Sgt. Pepper did. The way the 2018 mix of the White Album did, or Abbey Road, or Let It Be. This one did not overwhelm me and I mean, grab me. I didn't know why. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, there wasn't bounced down tracks like on Sgt. Pepper, if you know the whole story on how they did that mix and even the Abbey Road mixes. When the Beatles and George Martin, their producer, would run out of tracks, they would do a bounce down mix because they only worked on 4 tracks. So they would take those 4 tracks, transfer them to a new tape, and mix those 4 tracks down to 1 track, and you have 3 fresh tracks to work with. And then they ran out of tracks there, then they took that and did the same process all over again. So for Sgt. Pepper especially, they kept everything at Abbey Road, so he was able to go back to the pre-bounced down tracks and get everything spread out on individual tracks if he had to. Here, there was a lot of stuff that was, I guess, locked in to the 4 tracks where they really couldn't do too much separation. So that's where this AI system came into play that Peter Jackson had, which he used for the Get Back movie. So they really had to do a lot of separation. I didn't think it could be done. So to be totally honest here, even though I was underwhelmed initially, it's a miracle that they were able to get as much separation as they did. Now, a word about Giles Martin, and I've said this before on a couple of videos. There's a lot of people who are like, they're kind of down on him. Why is Giles Martin doing this? Who does Giles think he is? His father? The thing is, Giles is commissioned to do this. And I bring this up too because in 2020, he did a new stereo mix and 5.1 and Dolby Atmos mix of the Rolling Stones' album Goat's Head Soup, which is an album I really like. I know a lot of Stones fans are down on that album, but I love that record. I think it's a great coming down after the wildness of Exile on Main Street. So he did a mix of that album, and I think he improved on the mix. But I remember Steve Hoffman forums when the announcement was made, and I usually go to Steve Hoffman forums because I must love being tortured or something like that. I'm not a member, but I love going to Steve Hoffman forums to inflict pain on myself, I guess, because everybody there nitpicks about this, nitpicks about that. Everybody thinks they know this and that. And when they made the announcement, I will never forget this person who commented, "So, Giles Martin has decided to arse about with the Stones catalog." And I'm like, dude, Giles doesn't go and wake up on a beautiful sunny day and go, "Today is a great day to remix a Beatles album." No, the Beatles could ask anybody. The Beatles, by that I mean Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, the estate of John, which I think is now being run by Sean, and the estate of George, which I think, even though Olivia's name is on there, I think, Danny is primarily the person who's heading that one. Danny Harrison, his son, for those that don't know. And Sean, John's son, for those that don't know. So they could choose anybody. They could choose Steven Wilson. artist Steven Wilson, who not only does his own stuff, as well as with his band Porcupine Tree, but also is commissioned to do a lot of mixes for other artists. And he's now branching out into non-prog stuff. So they could have asked Steven Wilson to do it. They could have asked Bob Clearmountain, who Robbie Robertson has been trusting to redo the band's stuff. He could have chosen. They could choose a number of people, but they've chosen Giles because it's within the family. He's George Martin's son, the Beatles producer, and that's keeping it within the family. And he acted sort of as an apprentice to his father during the making of the anthology stuff, and he and his father collaborated on Love, so the Love Project. So it kind of makes sense instead of going outside the house. Again, he's commissioned to do this. They chose him to do it, much in the same way Pink Floyd chooses James Guthrie for their original catalog. The Roger Waters and Syd Barrett era stuff. So it makes sense. So, but on this one, like I said, I was a bit underwhelmed by it. I was going to go track by track. I filmed this once already, and it was way too long. And I don't want to be that long. I was going track by track, but I want to just go over some select tracks here. Overall, I like the mix. I'm used to it now, but over the years, it was the mono mix that I was going towards. We all have this kind of nostalgia for the original stereo mixes because that's how we grew up with it, people from my generation. We heard those original stereo mixes where rhythm tracks were here, some things were center, and a vocal was here. I never understood the rhyme or reason for those stereo mixes, but especially with Revolver, this was the first album where the Beatles were around for all of the mono mixing. You could kind of say that with George Martin and the Beatles, this was now sort of a co-production effort. Beginning with Revolver till the end, they were co-production efforts. Probably the way Nigel Godrich and Radiohead are. I think that if these albums were made today, the producer's credit would be produced by George Martin with the Beatles. Same way it's with Nigel Godrich and Radiohead, because he started to teach them the tools of the trade, and their hands were behind the boards as well, and they would give a yay or a nay to a mix, or say, I want this, or I want that. So this was pretty much a co-production effort, but the Beatles were there and they okayed the mono mixes. So once I discovered the mono mix after hearing the 87 CD, I sought out some of the mono mixes, and once the mono mix came out on vinyl and officially on CD in 2009, that was my go-to. And the stereo mix that Giles did for this one is not necessarily what he did with Sgt. Pepper, create a stereo of the mono, because some of the decisions in this mix, as far as where instruments come in and the differences between stereo and mono, he went with the stereo decisions, with the exception of Yellow Submarine. Yellow Submarine does have the acoustic guitar strum on the first lyric, In the Town, and the call and response in there as well, between John and Ringo, A Life at Ease. But that's where my initial sort of confusion came into play. So just a couple of things here. I will touch on a few tracks. The original 1966 stereo of Taxman has all rhythm instruments hard panned to the left. Vocals dead center, cowbell and tambourine hard pan to the right, and the solo is hard pan to the right. Very uneven stereo mix. It's better when you don't have headphones on, because when you have headphones on these stereo mixes, the hard panning is very quiet. I mean, of rhythm instruments you could hardly hear. The right channel is more prominent. The new stereo mix of Taxman, I do love. The drums are slightly off-center left in the stereo imaging with headphones on. And They pan the drums too on the fills. The snare and the snare is off center left, and the toms are hard pan to the left channel. Vocals dead center. Tambourine is on the left, is on the right, rather, excuse me. Cowbell is on the left, and the guitar solo is dead center. I like that mix. It's got a lot of power behind it. It's you can definitely feel the drums and the bass in this, but the guitar solo is just so stinging in this one. I really love it. So I really prefer that one. Eleanor Rigby. The original stereo mix is what I call the Beach Boys stereo mix. You have the string octet in mono, artificially double-tracked vocals spread out to the stereo. Paul's lead is in hard pan to the right channel, with a mistake of the artificial double tracking carrying over on the word Eleanor in the left channel. But it goes back to the stereo spread for the chorus. The new mix, I feel, has a better stereo spread on it, with the string octet, the 4 violins on the left channel, and the 2 violas and 2 cellos on the right. A much better stereo spread. The vocals are center now. Artificially double-tracked vocals, again, are spread out. But the spatial audio mix with Dolby Atmos on streaming sites, on mine, Apple Music, the mix for that, the entire album, overwhelmed me as opposed to the stereo mix. I've been going back and to the spatial audio mix of this thing. And in this case, streaming and physical can coexist. So on this one, I prefer the new mix. The spatial audio mix is astounding, with the strings enveloping you in the spatial area. I'm Only Sleeping, Giles Martin had a bit of fun with in the spatial audio mix. The cascading backwards guitars at the end are sort of traveling, simulated all around you, which I love. And Got to Get You Into My Life is another one I want to touch on. I think the 2022 stereo mix of it is beautiful. The original mono mix of that, in fact, the original mono mixes I feel are superior to any of these, hands down. Especially Got to Get You Into My Life. The brass instruments, as you know, they were mic'd very close, and they used artificial double tracking on them to create a phasing effect slightly, as well as a lot of compression on the brass. So you get this very bright, brassy sound. The stereo mix of Got to Get You Into My Life is, I grew up with it, but once I heard the mono, I hardly paid attention to it. Hard panned the brass to the right channel, all rhythm instruments, drums, bass, guitar, hard panned to the left, and vocals in the center. The mono mix has a longer fade and different ad-libs, and I wish Giles would have gone with that. But he kept the fade exactly the way it is in the stereo mix, but the brass is spread out. It's got the artificially double-tracked sound and the compression, which is hardly there in the stereo mix. You get this bright, beautiful, brassy sound. During the verses, you could hear the breathing on the tenor sax player, which I love in this. It's like I'm standing right next to the brass section. I love it. I like the panning of the tape loops on Tomorrow Never Knows, but I got to tell you, it's slightly bass heavy for my taste. Definitely bass heavy for my taste. Once I took my EQ settings off and I played it flat, it was a bit better. But it was just a tad bass heavy. I like how he pans the tape loops, and during the backwards guitar solo, the tape loops and the guitars counterpan each other. Spatial audio mix of this thing wins hands down. If you got your AirPods or your AirPods Pro or your AirPods Max or whatever you got for spatial audio, that thing with Dolby Atmos those things are swirling all around you. So Dolby Atmos mix, a lot more fun there. But those are just some songs I want to touch on. Overall, I like the new mix. I don't know if it's going to make me replace the mono, but I like the new mix. Again, it was just a tad underwhelming for me. I like the fact that even though most of the drum tracks are slightly off center left on all of the tracks, he was able to get some separation, probably more stereo separation on Ringo's fills than any of the other mixes he did. And you could tell it on I Want to Tell You. You could hear it on Got to Get You Into My Life. You could hear it on Tomorrow Never Knows, where snares here and the toms are here. So he's got a nice stereo spread on these drums now. So this new mix I like, and I'll probably get used to it. But I will be honest, and it's probably going to take me some time, it didn't knock me over the way Sgt. Pepper did. I think Giles could have possibly had a bit more fun. But then again, I think there were limitations with the technology and the thing with instruments being locked in on several tracks and not being able to get true separation and trying to separate as much as you could with this AI system that they use to separate the tracks. I didn't know it was going to be this hard because I know Abbey Road did have a demixing process where they were able to separate tracks before. So I guess Peter Jackson's system is far superior, but they did what they could, and overall I'm satisfied with it. Not knocked over, but I'm satisfied with it. Again, sorry this is so late. We're now past 17 minutes, and I didn't go over every track. I'm going to do another video on the sessions discs. Hopefully, I won't have any delays on that. But give me some of your thoughts in the comments here. I really appreciate it, and probably was not articulate on this as much as I could have been. But again, give me some of your thoughts. And again, thank you for waiting patiently, and until the next one, I'll talk to you soon.